everyone, this is Amy Johnson Crow, and welcome to this week's Archives.com live stream. This week we are going to answer the question, does that record even exist? Now, I don't know anyone who has unlimited time to go researching their family history, so we need to make that research time as efficient as possible. So it's a good idea to not go chasing after records that were never created to begin with. And that's what we're going to take a look at today. How can we tell whether or not a record should even exist? Now, to be clear, we're talking about vital records. And vital records are those that are records of births, marriages, and deaths. And specifically, when we're talking about vital records, we're talking about the ones that are maintained by a government office, such as a probate court or a health department. And these government offices could either be a county office or could be a state office. So that's exactly what we're talking about today when we're talking about do these records exist? Do these records even exist? We're looking at those civil vital records. We're not talking about church records or Bible records or anything like that. We're talking about those records of births, marriages, and deaths that were created by a government office and specifically for the purpose of recording that event. And it's important to know that different places started recording vital records at different times. For example, most states in New England started keeping vital records in the 1600s. Absolutely wonderful records, wonderful civil vital records coming out of New England very, very early. Contrast that with Pennsylvania, which really isn't that far away from New England. They didn't start recording civil marriage records until 1885 and didn't start recording civil birth and death records until 1906. So it really is going to have a huge impact on our research. So if we know going into it that Pennsylvania didn't start recording civil birth and death records until 1906, we know that we're not going to find a civil birth record for our ancestor who was born in Pennsylvania in, say, 1740, because they're not going to be recording that for another 160 years. So it's really going to help our research be more efficient, and it's certainly going to reduce the frustration that we feel. It's like, why can't I find this record? Well, it's because that state wasn't even keeping those records at that time. And also, who recorded these vital records could change over time. In many places, we see vital records start to be recorded at a county level, perhaps in a probate court or a local health department. And then many states transferred responsibility to a state agency in the 1900s. Now, they could have transferred responsibility completely, or they might have just required those local entities to send the state a copy. So that's going to vary from state to state. But the important thing to remember is that vital records often started on that county level. And then not until the 20th century do we really see a whole big statewide compilation of them. Let's take as an example Ohio. Now in Ohio, births and deaths, and again we're talking about civil records here, those that were recorded by a government agency. Births and deaths were first recorded in county probate courts beginning in 1867. And another copy was also sent to the state health department beginning in December 1908. Marriage records in Ohio are a little bit different, and this isn't unusual to see births and deaths starting at one date and marriages starting another. Marriages in Ohio were recorded in the county probate court starting when the county was created. So if you have a marriage in Fairfield County, well, Fairfield County was created in 1800. So the marriage records in Fairfield County date back to 1800. Vinton County, on the other hand, wasn't created until 1850, but that's when their marriage records start to be recorded in 1850 at the creation of the county. Now, in Ohio, the state doesn't maintain a copy of the marriage records per se, but they do maintain an index. But that statewide index doesn't begin until 1950. So before 1950, you're going to have an idea of where in Ohio that marriage took place. So let's say that you've been doing research in Ohio and you've been having great success, and you have an ancestor who came from Pennsylvania. And you're thinking, oh, no problem, because Pennsylvania is right next to Ohio. How different can it be? Well, it's actually quite a bit different. If we take a look at those vital records for Pennsylvania, there are actually very few vital birth and death records that exist from the 1800s. They just simply weren't required. There were a couple years here and there where they were required, and those have been published in various books, but those are definitely the exception and not the rule. Civil birth and death records really didn't begin in Pennsylvania until 1906. So that's, 40 some years after Ohio started keeping them. And again, Ohio and Pennsylvania are right next door to each other, but they have very different vital records laws. And marriages in Pennsylvania weren't kept as a civil record until the county orphans courts started recording them in 1885. Now again, compare that to Ohio, where they were recording marriage records at the county level beginning when the county was created. So again, you really need to have an idea of what the requirements were for that particular state and where those records were first created and when they were beginning to be created. It's going to save you a lot of frustration. So it's important to figure out when and where the event occurred, because vital records are kept by location. So you need to have an idea of when and where that event occurred. Where was that child born? Where was that couple married? Where did that person die? And when did that happen? That's going to help you key in on whether or not there should be a record for it. So how can we go about doing that? Well, to get an idea of when and where events occurred, the census is a great resource. Now, here's an example from the 1910 census out of Marion County, Indiana, which is Indianapolis. And here we have the Riley family. And we see the husband, Peter Riley, was born in Rhode Island. His wife was born in North Carolina, and they report here in the 1910 census that they had been married for 6 years. It's a great thing about the 1910 census. That was one of the questions. How many years have you been married? We also see the oldest child, who is age 6, was born in Indiana. So if we take all this information together, we have a husband born in Rhode Island, a wife born in North Carolina. They've been married for 6 years, and their oldest child, a 6-year-old, was born in Indiana. That makes me think that their marriage occurred around 1904, because they're reporting that they had been married for 6 years, and this is in 1910. So they're married in 1904. And that marriage likely occurred in Indiana because they had been married 6 years ago. Their oldest child is 6, and that child was born in Indiana. So we can use that census to get an idea of where these various events took place. Now, not all censuses gave us such great information like we had in the 1910 census, where they asked, how many years have you been married? Here's an example from the 1880 census out of Wayne County, Michigan. And here we have the Bartlett family. And we have a husband who is born in Massachusetts. The wife is born in New Hampshire. And the oldest child, age 25, is listed as being born in Massachusetts. So, based on this information, husband in Massachusetts, wife born in New Hampshire, the oldest child was born around 1855 in Massachusetts. So this makes me think that the marriage occurred around 1854. We have a child born in 1855. The marriage probably happened just a year or two before that. And that marriage likely occurred in Massachusetts based upon the birthplace of that oldest child. Now, it's possible that they were married someplace else and they moved to Massachusetts before the child was born. That's certainly possible. But when you're starting to look for records, that's a really good place to start. So that's a good rule of thumb to keep in mind. When you're looking for marriages, look at the birthplace of the husband, the wife, and the oldest child. The marriage often occurred where the oldest child was born. And that marriage often happened just a year or two before the birth. Typically in the 17 and 1800s, couples would start having a family shortly after they were married. Not like today where couples will wait, several years, perhaps 5 or 10 years before they start having children. Back in the 17 and 1800s, you see couples starting to have families right away. So that marriage often occurred just a year or two before the birth of the first child. So now we have an idea of when and where these various events took place, but how can we learn about whether or not vital records were kept in that area when those events happened? Well, a really great resource is the Ancestry.com wiki, Ancestry.com being a sister site of Archives.com. And the Ancestry.com wiki is free. It's really easy to get to, Ancestry.com/wiki. And a couple of really great sources that are included in the Ancestry.com wiki, including The Source, a guidebook to American genealogy, and Red Book, American State, County, and Town Sources. Both of these are standard references for genealogy. So if you're wanting information about certain records, certain resources, these are both great resources to consult, and both of them are included in the Ancestry.com wiki. So when you go to Ancestry.com/wiki, you'll find a page that looks like this. And there's a lot of different things that you can explore, but for our purposes today, when we're looking for, how to find out if vital records exist in a certain place at a certain time, look over here on the left where we have a search box. And let's say that you're interested in finding out about vital records in Indiana. Well, in the search box, just type in Indiana Vital Records. And you'll get a page like this, where it will describe when various vital records were first created in Indiana and who created them. So we learn that we have marriage records in Indiana beginning at the creation of the county, like we have in Ohio. The state didn't start keeping copies of marriage records until 1958. And we also learn that Indiana didn't keep birth and death records until 1882. So a wealth of information here on the Ancestry.com wiki about Indiana vital records. And you'll find similar pages for all of the other states. So if you're curious about Pennsylvania vital records or North Dakota vital records, you can do that same thing. Just go into the search box and enter the name of the state and vital records, and you'll get a page that looks very similar to this. So what do you do if there's no vital record? Let's say that your ancestor was born in Indiana in 1860. Well, that's 22 years before they started keeping civil birth records. What else can we look at? Well, think about other records that were created around the time of that event. For example, church records. Whether it's baptism records, marriage records, burial records. Many people attended churches, and many churches kept records of these vital events. Also think about newspapers, not only obituaries, but also wedding notices and anniversary notices, especially for those milestone anniversaries, like a 50th wedding anniversary. A lot of times you'll find great articles about a couple that's celebrating a 50th wedding anniversary. And also think about tombstones, especially for that death information. Now, the information about the birth might be a little bit sketchy, but that tombstone, if it was put up near the time of the death, can be a very good source for that death information. So when you're researching on archives.com, how can you find out what records are available for you to search? Well, when you log into archives.com, and you can also get to this page, you can also get to the collections page if you're not logged in, and I'll show you that in a moment. But if you are logged in, here on the home page, scroll down just a little bit, and down here where we're talking about the featured collections, there's a link where you can view all of the collections. And that'll take you to this page, the archives.com collections page. And everybody can get to this page simply by going to archives.com/collections. At the top, you will see a section that is listing the newest collections that have been added, the newest collections that have been updated, and you can also search for specific collections. So let's say that you have research in Texas, and you would like to know exactly what resources archives.com has for your Texas research. The easiest way to do that is to look here in the search box and just type in the name of the state that you're interested in. In this case, we're interested in Texas. So I can type in Texas, I can click the search button, and it will list all of the collections that archives.com has that are specific to the state of Texas. So that's a great resource to see exactly what archives.com has and can help you as you're doing your searches. Next week on the archives.com live stream, we're going to be talking about source citations. And I know some of you might be kind of cringing at the thought of those. You might be thinking about your high school English class and how you had to do footnotes. Don't worry, source citations are not as hard as you think. And that's what we're going to tackle next week, Wednesday, June 26th at this same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Meanwhile, stay connected with archives.com, whether that's on our blog, liking us on Facebook, following us on Twitter. You can also watch all of our previous live streams on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/user/archivescom. Now, normally this is the time when I welcome everyone to come over to the chat room where we will answer questions and we'll have some great conversation about genealogical research. I'm actually pre-recording this week's live stream. I'm going to be out of the office on Wednesday, so wanted to make sure that I got this recorded for everyone. So I'm not going to be joining you in the chat room later, but I will be back live for the presentation on the 26th about source citations. In the meantime, again, stay connected with archives.com, whether it's the blog, Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube. And until next time, this is Amy Johnson Crow, wishing you happy researching.